My name, for those of you who don't know me, although I know many in the room, my name is Jim Davis. I traveled all the way from UCLA to be at this event, and very, very pleased to be here. This session is actually a really nice segue from the opening session. And the one thing I would like to start off with, I'm very, very proud to have Innovate, now formerly IS Associates, as a program to my office, and I'm very, very pleased to see this kind of event starting up and this sort of kind of discussion going forward. This one is, as I said, a really nice segue because one of the things about the innovation is what do you do from a traditional industry standpoint. So the title of this, I guess I should have done this first. If you're in the right session, the title is Guiding Traditional Industries Through the Digital Journey. I wanted to basically use the vocabulary I've been using just to kind of set the stage. Within UCLA and what we're doing, we use the term digitization, to mean just converting over to digital formats, putting data, observations, images, all sorts of things into digital so that they're in a useful form. But we use the term digitalization to mean let's change how we do things because we now have things in a digital form. And the experience here in the university is one of them. We have a long-standing tradition of how we do things. And so the notion of digitalization within the university is actually quite hard. And so what does it mean to innovate within the university, start changing programs, start changing how things are done, and so forth? And the product is changing as well, although our product is research and students. So this whole session is about traditional industries, and I'm very, very pleased with an august panel here bringing in healthcare and manufacturing, very, very traditional sorts of industries, but there's huge amounts of innovation that you will hear about. And one of the things we really would like to explore today is what that innovation looks like. And just as was talked about at the opening session, innovation is about the product, innovation is about the process, and innovation is about everything those products and those processes touch and what they're doing. So it all ultimately becomes this ecosystem or system or supply chain or whatever, the way things work together going forward. So I'm very, very excited about this session. It's really important to consider traditional industries and how they're doing this. So with regard to introductions and getting us started, we have Renee, Haresh, and Bhupesh. You have their bios in the write-up, so we don't want to just repeat those. What we agreed to do is have them introduce themselves, but in the context of a traditional industry and what innovation or the sort of an overview of the innovation they've been taking forward. That'll get us started, and I have a series of questions in the usual way to start things off, but please, this is a dialogue, it's a conversation, and so don't hesitate to ask questions, and I'll keep looking out and we will stop and go with the audience questions and open this up as a conversation. So, Renee, to you.
Shall I begin? Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming. My name is Renee Dua. By training, I'm a nephrologist, so I'm a kidney specialist. And I've been in private practice for 15 years, maybe more now. But about 5 years ago, I started a health tech company by the name of Heal. We deliver physician house calls, and we're operational in about 8 states in the U.S. And the idea was that the best doctors aren't necessarily in a building. The best doctors come to you. They offer very high quality, comprehensive care to kids, to seniors, to people in our age groups, college students. And so we've been operating about 5 years. We're a full force software company, right? Operationalizing the business of taking care of people and medical teams. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk with you more about that.
And Haresh.
Yeah, Haresh Malkani, he has the power to turn me off here. So, I'm the CTO of an entity called SESME, which is a Smart Manufacturing Institute, which was founded a couple of years ago and which is now, quote unquote, novated under UCLA. So I'm happy to be here. Prior to joining SESME, I spent about 3 decades in manufacturing, and innovation in manufacturing has changed flavors dramatically in the last 10 to 20 years, right? It used to be that you might say, hey, I have a manufacturing process here, and for me to innovate, I want to bring in a a different kind of a sensing technology, or a different kind of a control technology, or a different kind of a material, or and so on, right? What has happened in the last 15 years is that the game of innovation in manufacturing has changed more to how you're leveraging information to make smarter decisions, right? So the flavor has changed. And it's not that we don't continue to have emphasis on, better materials and better controls and so on and so forth, but it has to be done in context of how information moves from one part of the organization to another part of the organization to actually innovate, right? To come up with new product or new processes. So that's the change I'm seeing, and that's in my new role now. I begin to experience that with other industries, and I'm finding a common theme there. There were a couple of other things that happened this morning in terms of what the new aspects around culture, for example. So when you look at traditional industries where they've been doing things, manufacturing things, for 40, 50, 60 years, doing the same thing, without any digital technologies, now the culture change has caused them to change how they do business, right? How they manufacture products. And so those are the themes that I have come across in terms of how innovation and innovation is seen by traditional manufacturing these days.
Thank you, Haresh. This is Bhupesh, Arora. Good to see familiar faces in the crowd. I'm at Avery, Dennison. The company's been around for 85 years. We invented the sticky labels. So you walk into a supermarket, every product has a label, and we put that identification on that product, so you know exactly what you're buying. The paddle that you are wearing has labels that tell you how to wash it, right? So you don't spoil it. So we put that care label on, where it's made out of. So we are everywhere you look, whether it's highway stop signs, and we have innovated a lot, right? So when we look at innovation, Avery Dennison is kind of ripe for disruption. So what happens when physical labels become digital labels, and what does that mean for us? So we have been moving in that area for the last 20 years with RFID tags, and we have that to provide better supply chain inventory tracking. But our ambition is to give every physical object a digital identity. And what that means, we're still figuring that out, but we are pushing a lot in multiple segments. We've been big on apparel. We're going into food and many other segments. And there's been a lot of successes in digital. So we launched digital products such as Janela, we call it Janela, where we with RFID tracking, if you buy an apparel from Macy's, we are doing some consumer engagement. We're providing apps, for example, where you can create a virtual wardrobe and have customer loyalty associated with that. We also launched a product called Fresh Marks, which is an IoT product that senses temperatures in restaurants, so there's less food waste. So that's been pretty successful, brought in revenues, and there's some more, such as blockchain and other products on the horizon that we're working on. So a lot of interesting things happening in a traditional industry.
Can easily see we have, as I said, an august panel here. And just to put it in perspective again, we're talking about Avery Dennison, what was it, 1930s, 80 years. If we go to Haresh's background, 100 years or so with that manufacturing. And then there's the healthcare, what is that, 5,000 years, somewhere thereabouts, maybe longer. So we do have some traditional industries. But what we want to do is explore the digital journey and the innovation that you're hearing. The first question we wanted to just open up with and open the discussion, this all has to do with data, and it has to do with extending data into much broader uses and so forth, data across communities. And wanted to just go down the row here again with the role of data and how that was extended, how that was taken forward. So I'll reverse the order this time.
You got it.
All right. So Bhupesh, we'll go the other direction.
Yeah, so when you look, kind of extending the conversation, we give every product an identity that creates data. And what that means is a lot can be done with that. So our customers come to us and say, how can we extend the data that you provide? Just not the ID of the product, which we call variable data. It has like where it's, for example, a piece of apparel. Where is it made? What's the size? What's the color? But how do you start tracking it from the source all the way to the destination? So the blockchain component of the data comes into play. A lot of our customers are asking for that information so the customers know the provenance. If you are going to a store, that wine bottle, is it really the wine bottle or is it a fake wine bottle? The shoes you're buying, is it an authentic shoe or a fake shoe? So there's a lot of use cases that's building up to track the authenticity and the provenance of the data. So the extension of the data, tracking it, and there's a lot more. As I mentioned, we launched this Janela platform, which is all about consumer engagement. So we, as a label supplier, are getting more into the consumer engagement scenario, which is very interesting, right? We don't think, what is a label company doing in a consumer engagement scenario, because we're B to B to B to C, because we're a piece of a product that sits, on a bigger product, right? But we store the data, right? So, for example, with Macy's, as I mentioned, you buy a piece of apparel, you can use our app to register that apparel on that app, and then you start getting a virtual wardrobe that's forming, and we can now build customer loyalty, can give you alerts on new fall fashion lineup, for example, or discounts. So now you start building in that marketing and the consumer engagement scenario. There's a lot more personalization use cases that can drive from that. So that data, what I mean by data is there, but the foundational part can be extended with an ecosystem and the partnership with the ecosystem that comes into play to make that happen. So that's how we look at data.
Bhupesh, can I ask, somewhere along the line, there had to be a hard decision. You had all these labels, a long history with this, without the data. And someone said, we better change what we're thinking about here. Something's got to change, otherwise we're going out of business. Can you talk about that a little bit? What that moment looked like?
Yeah, I think it's an awareness of digital and the disruption. I think it's probably started from Uber and Blockbuster getting busted. All those conversations started with at the CEO level, like, what does that mean for us? And we at least need to get our feet wet in this, right? And do something to understand what that disruption may mean or may not mean. So I will say we're in the early stages. We got some products out to really understand what that means, how does a business model shift, and I would say we are level 2 out of level 5. There's a lot. The journey is long. I don't think the market has really understood what is possible, what is digital in the world of supply chain, in the extended use, not in the traditional supply chain, but in the extended use of supply chain. So I think we're figuring it out, but there's heightened visibility at the top level to explore it and come back with an understanding, so we are ahead of the market, not behind it.
Haresh.
I guess the advantage of being in the middle is that you're always second, right? So I'll take a slightly different, or provide a different perspective on data, particularly in manufacturing. So if you look at, I want to first distinguish data versus information, right? Information is something that's actionable. So data, I'll give you an example of a thermocouple that's used for monitoring temperature here, right? So the thermocouple that measures the temperature only measures the temperature, but there's something behind it that says this is a temperature being measured in this room at this particular time, in this building, in this environment, right? Then it provides a context to it. And when you provide context, then it becomes actionable, right? So the control system that's controlling the temperature now knows how to control it because it has more information. So take that scenario and then apply it to manufacturing. So you have a piece of machinery that's running, that's giving out data from a sensor, but then there's something that's above and beyond that that's providing context, so the control system now knows to change the speed or the pressure to get the product out the right way, right? So what's happening today is that as you look at the power of that data and the power of information and how you can actually provide more intelligence to your factories, more intelligence to your machines, and that intelligence can exist at different layers. It can be down at the machine level. It can be at the level of a plant where multiple machines are running together, or it'll be at the enterprise level, like Bhupesh was saying, right? So the power of data and information is way above and beyond what one had imagined just a few years ago. And what's happening as a result of that is that people are finding new ways to do their business, new ways to produce their product, new ways to run their machines. And that's a remarkable exponential change that's happening as a result of that. The other flavor that I want to provide is that having more data and information also provides you with the opportunity of leveraging the best-in-class technologies and products, right? So it used to be that if you were a manufacturer that was sort of married to Siemens or Rockwell, these are all automation system providers, that you didn't have the ability to then take that information and interface with something that's not Siemens or Rockwell. Having more data and information almost makes it mandatory for you to open that up and have that exchange. So that's again causing a disruptive, change in manufacturing. So
Haresh, the same kind of question. There's some hard things going on here too, right? There are things like equipment that's 50 years old, and there's IT systems that are 30 years old, and they don't have security. They don't collect the right kind of data. All sorts of things like this. Whereas the IT that we talk about is probably changing pace almost double the speed of the equipment, or manufacturing equipment's running all the time, so it's hard to make changes. Can you talk through some of these hard decisions or hard places to move this forward in the manufacturing space as you see it?
yeah, I think that's a fairly significant challenge in manufacturing today. I mean, you mentioned industries and companies that are older than 3, 4, 5 decades here. I think if you look at the landscape of manufacturing, actually, I don't know what the percentage is, but a large percentage of manufacturers have equipment that is 30, 40, 50 years old, and they still want to run it, right? Fortunately, what's happening is that newer technologies, like you've heard about Internet of Things, right? You take a little device and you attach it to a product or a machine, and then now you have the ability to take that data and send it out to the cloud, and then do some analysis and send information back so that you can make decisions, right? Well, if you have old piece of machinery, you now no longer have to wire things up, send it through your traditional manufacturing IT infrastructure, and then send it up to the enterprise level to do some decision making, right? So that has changed. So fortunately, for those who are willing to go down this journey, even if you have legacy equipment, there are technologies out there. So that challenge is being addressed in that fashion, right? But the bigger challenge is that the people who are associated with that older technology and the older machinery, they are still out there with immense amount of knowledge that they possess. How do you then capture that along with that piece of equipment and then bring it to bear on decision making? I think that's and things like AI and all that stuff are essentially addressing that challenge.
So Renee, can I take obviously the same question to you? I'll set it up this way. What I find fascinating when I was looking at what you're doing is you're actually innovating by going back to the way things had been done a long time ago. I grew up with Gunsmoke, and the doc used to make house calls. And we're sort of 50 years later and going that direction.
Yeah, but it's interesting to the point of the people that I'm sharing the panel with. You can only innovate as fast as people want to surround themselves, and innovate as well, right? We work with gigantic payers. I mean, they have hundreds of engineers, and they can't figure out how to solve a claim. Right? We worry about HIPAA compliance in the field, right? That's all software, how we do that, how we protect patient privacy. At every house call, we gather 5,000 data points, and we use that to then predict what's going to happen to this patient. Will they need us again? Will they see us again, right? We share that data with our payers, and they look at us like, well, what do we do with this, And I'm thinking to myself, well, guys, you can actually use this to determine which of your patients are high risk or need more service or really are wasting money or are better suited for an HMO or whatnot. So it's really kind of a fascinating thing, the way that, modernization has to be a group effort. We are in some ways light years ahead in our industry, but we can't do anything about it because no one else is. you know? And it kind of puts us in this very hilarious path. We're working with a payer right now for people who are severely in need of access in San Diego, and they're not capable of electronic billing. You know, so I'm literally having a conversation with our CEO right now about sending paper claims for patients that we see. I mean, I haven't done this in 20 years, you know? So it's one of these things where I think modernization and then the predictive capability of it, certainly in healthcare, is something we're doing. We are becoming bigger than a house call, right? There aren't enough doctors to come and see the patient every single time. And these models like telemedicine and remote monitoring are things that we really specialize in to coordinate care for patients. And then once again, this business of using AI to make predictions about what's going to happen to our patients, that's really where we live as a software company. But again, I think pretty far ahead of our brothers and sisters in the same space.
You're actually touching on my follow-up question. I was making a bad joke before, but what I find really fascinating is what you're talking about there, which is the ability to collect data in a very wide area across many different kinds of people. But you also depend upon that data being able to be used across different kinds of providers and payers and so forth.
It's very important. You know, when children, for example, when we see, we're very busy with taking care of children. To give you an example, when children grow up near a freeway in the home of a person who smokes or drinks, that impacts them for the next 75 years, right? And nobody is collecting that data. Nobody is looking at the possibilities for that child, what we can do right then. What did they have for lunch? You know, are they eating fries and chicken nuggets every day? Because they're going to grow up and be your next bypass patient, right? So that's exactly what we do. It's kind of, as you said, an old-fashioned way to collect data. And of course, we'll pick up on that as well. But in the end, what we see, what we hear, what we observe in an environment is a part of these data points. And even though it does sound old-fashioned, its predictive capabilities, you know, they're endless. We'll go into, I'll do a house call. I happen to, you know, be capable of taking care of seniors, and I'll see that they have 35 medications in the medicine cabinet, 15 of which are on auto refill for no reason. You know, who's paying for that, right? I am. You are, right? Why? Why are we paying for that? Do these people even need that? You know, there's great medicine and evidence-based data coming out right now that says less is more in the senior population. So these are, again, super old-fashioned idea, you know, but using predictive capability and really first-class software. We have some awesome engineers who think through how we are going to keep these folks out of hospitals, out of urgent cares, even hospitalized at home if necessary, but certainly at home.
Just want to take a moment and remind everyone, feel free to ask questions. We can keep going here, but please ask questions. Yes, please.
We work backwards because our mission is to deliver access to care, right? So it says a lot about that patient population that the insurer that's taking care of them isn't capable, right? And so we work from the ground up. I mean, it's a great question, and in some ways it's a tough conversation because it's a question of who is our customer, right? Who are we trying to satisfy? The bandwidth that will now go to that payer group is going to take away from some, you know, tech savvy so-and-so, you know. So it's a very challenging question. Our mission is to deliver access to care. When we study patients that might come from a payer like that, those are the people that are using the emergency room for care. And so the first thing we want to do is stop that process. And so exactly correct.
Actually, if I can, oh, please.
I have a question for Haresh. So you mentioned cultural transition, right, with the modernization. 50-year-old company, 100-year-old company, established way of doing things that needs to be transformed. How do you what are the tips, what works, what doesn't work in navigating that cultural shift?
Yeah, I think that's a question that is coming from many different industry sectors, right? So I'll give you an example from the type of industry that I came from before. We had, as I mentioned, we had people who have been in the company for 20, 25, 30 years, and for them to see the benefit of adopting digital technologies to improve what they do already, that's the key thing. How do you show them that, right? And show is a key word here. So it's the thing that fails consistently is that somebody sitting all the operators down in a room and telling them about digital technology. That's not how it's done, right? What you need to do is bring together a group of people that can talk about, hey, Bob or Judy, let's go down to that piece of machinery that you work on every day, and let me show you how this new technology can help you make decisions either faster or better, or make your production rates go up, et cetera, right? Once they see that, then they say, yes, I can do that. That's one way to do it. The other thing is that I think we underestimate the power of the tension that exists between the younger generation, who are very digitally savvy, and some of the older generation, experienced people who are on the floor, who are actually making things happen on a daily basis, right? It's not a barrier, it's more like a tension. So if you put together a couple of younger generation engineers along with these operators and have them work together to solve some problems, they immediately gain out of saying that, hey, this person is thinking differently. I can learn something out of it. And the younger generation will say, okay, this person has years of experience that I cannot capture digitally. What is it that I can do to do that, right? But that's very healthy. So the successes that I've seen in some of the industry is where you actually started at that level and not necessarily, speaking on slides, essentially.
So we approach digital. We create a digital innovation center of excellence. So I've been running new technologies for a while, but we're dabbling with it, right? And we move. Before it was social, mobile, analytics, and cloud, right? Like maybe 10 years back. The digital has forced us to think differently. So we formed this beginning of last year, a center of excellence. We call it DICE, and it's a unique framework, right? And the framework was focused on how do we make the change happen? Because digital is just not about technology, it's making the change happen. So, and the change comes from top down, right? And if the leaders cannot think digital, it doesn't matter, right? So we created this, the Digital Innovation Center of Excellence was based on 3 pillars. One is learning. And what that meant is sending our top 100 leaders, make them digitally savvy. So we have 20 people actually going through a digital program, 6 months program. They work on a project, they learn design thinking, they learn agile. And these are people from multiple functions. They're not from IT, right? So I think that's how we're making the change happen. The second is just showing how concepts or ideas can be brought to life quickly. So we created a digital studio lab, and that we've done 6 proof of concepts in blockchain and IoT and so on. And that bringing that to life from an agile framework brings that speed and agility they want to look for. Either you squash the idea or you move on, right? And lastly, it's the partnership. So the ecosystem to not reinvent the wheel. And that's a big focus on that. So that's how we are pushing the change, and change being from the top, and training leaders who can open up the pipeline because they can think differently.
Yes, please.
So on the other end of the spectrum from Dr. Dua's experience with paper, with the extraordinary volumes of data that you are collecting, the other thing that's pushing on the edges of the digital journey is the digital coworker, or the bot. Have you guys had experience with that? And I'd like to get your thoughts on the kind of business, the social, the cultural implications of the introduction of robotics into the business process.
Sure. I'm happy to. For us, we're about 5 years old, so we actually are just starting to work this way. It still needs an enormous amount of oversight, and specific to the business of predicting human behavior, right? Because that's really a lot of what health and wellness and staying healthy and well is. We're certainly not there yet. There are these other companies that we're aware of that are trying to make a go of this. They're doing a smaller portion of what we do, which is a pretty big scale medical practice. But I will say, certainly in healthcare, one of the things we're afraid of is losing the human touch, right? And it's why we started with a physician house call, because the idea that healthcare becomes so automated that you're not even, and by the way, I've lost count on a personal note of how many house calls I've gone on where the real issue is depression or anxiety or loneliness or confusion. I'm not sure that bots are going to save us from those things, certainly yet. And so that's kind of our place at the moment. Small tasks, yeah. Big overthinking, overarching part of our design, not yet.
Yeah, so RPA, or robotic process automation, became a topic last year, and it was more about efficiency, right? It goes back to that robotic worker. So we did, through the DICE, we actually did some proof of concepts in few functions, and we have implementations going on in finance as well as manufacturing, and there's one more area, infrastructure. So we have the first, what we call, phase of implementation going on, and we're looking at doing an enterprise-wide assessment, doing workshops where we can get, where we know we have some target areas where we use a lot of manual processes. We know that, right? So we're going and we want to do workshops in the beginning of next year and compile the opportunities and the business cases. So I would say we went from proof of concept to the first 3 implementations, and then next year is going to be more scaling it to the next level. We found efficiencies in terms of adding value. So you are taking tactical manual processes out of the equation and shifting workload to more value-add activities, higher value-add activities. We've seen that. Is there a lot of cost benefit in this? I think it will come over time as we shift more and more of that lower level work to RPA. And as we go in the enterprise-wide, looking at more broader swath of opportunities. So I think there is definitely some opportunities. Even in the chat bots, we've seen that. I think we are dabbling into it. So I believe in that because we know we use a lot of manual labor in a lot of places that can be shifted.
Sorry, there was a question over here.
I got a question, actually. That's from Bhupesh, from the doctor. So you are collecting that information now, that data, and maybe that data is becoming information. Are you then selling that back, or slicing and dicing that back and selling it to the customer? It sounds like a new business opportunity.
Yeah, we talk about it a lot, right? And it's really the legalities around that. And there's an aggregation component that could be. We exploring that. We haven't really made a decision on that, but we do have a wealth of data because we have a identification label of every product that we sell or every retailer sells, right? And there's a lot can be done with it. It's the legality and how much the customer wants it. So it's more going to the value add back to the customer and saying, we can do this for you. Here's the use case, like we're doing with the Janela platform. And those are the scenarios where it's to that one-on-one customer scenario. We thought about aggregation and what it can do for the industry. So we could actually see pricing trends, right, from retailer, but we haven't really explored to that extent yet at this point. And it may be a use case that comes to fruition maybe in the future, in the next 1 or 2 years, but we're not there yet.
From a healthcare from a healthcare standpoint, it would be we can't, right? In healthcare, you don't make money growing your business.
I'm kind of curious about in each of your industries, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, what is being done in terms of developing partnerships in your supply chains or outreach to to the providers in healthcare that are helping to raise the awareness about the conceptual advantages of partnering and sharing? What's going on in each of you?
Well, I mean, for us, because of the regulation piece, we are very, very careful. And again, our user our patient is not necessarily someone who sits on social media all day, right? We're not in the urgent care business. I have a cold, I need a Z-Pak, let me get a doctor. That couldn't be less interesting to us, and frankly is an overutilization of what we are hoping to accomplish. So we're looking at vulnerable populations, which are kids and seniors. And in both, what we're doing is working on relationships with caretakers, right? So who takes care of kids, parents, schools, right? These kinds of daycares, these kinds of facilities. And much of the same exists for seniors, right? Facilities, hospitals and payers, right? Medicare and Medicare Advantage plans are going to be, healthcare is going to be the next president's winning vote, right? That's what's going to help our president either stay in office or our next president come into office. So healthcare is everything in the way of information and how it's shared alongside these regulations. But I'll say it is very challenging, and word of mouth has been our most powerful ally, right? A great experience for a patient or a patient whose life we save, and we are genuinely in that business, right? That, goes miles. It goes miles and miles, right?
So for us, we bucket digital into two categories. One is about optimization. How can we use digital to optimize our internal processes, whether it's RPA for finance or use big data for better decision making. So that's kind of the optimization. And then there's the transformation, which we talked about, Diginella or the Freshmarks platform, where we can create new business models out of it, right? And when you look from both viewpoints, and definitely more on the transformation, you cannot succeed without the partnership and go further in the network of partnerships. And be looking at it from a different lens. And if you go and all follow our LinkedIn feed or social feed, you'll see the amount of press we're putting out there with partners, and it's a lot. As I said, we're in the initial stages, whether it's with Beef Chain to track beef with their blockchain, blockchain, we have that, or with Golden States Food to track the patties with RFID tags. So we have a target list of technology partners, because the big companies that are suppliers are also now partners. Very interesting, right? So it's a very mutually beneficial relationship, two-way relationship, versus a one-way world we used to exist in, right? So IBM is no more a supplier, but IBM is our partner, right? Or Amazon is no more a supplier, but also a partner. And they have access. They're creating, for example, blockchain networks for industries, right? They are putting some products out there, and we could be an enabler to a lot of those, right? Because we have an ambition to put a digital identity on every physical object. So we have a ton of use cases we can open up. We don't know which ones will be successful, right? But that's where the partnership ecosystems comes into play, because it opens up a lot of doors. So there's a lot of push within our business divisions to create these rich partnership and see where it makes sense. And leads to agility and speed. And in the end of the day, we may decide that certain things we want to do ourselves. We don't need a partner. So we really, as I said, we are in a chaotic mode out here, where we are learning. At the same time, we have to get out there, right?
If I may, I just want to build on a partnership question, then Susan, I'll come back to you. The partnership, especially when they're data partnerships like have been talked about here, have risks with them and they have opportunity. And so there's always this issue of two sides to the same coin and managing this. Can you talk about this a little bit? I mean, you're talking about HIPAA and regulation, versus the benefits of being able to aggregate some data and predict whole new things. Or in the manufacturing space, it's there's risk and opportunity with these business agreements. Bhupesh, you're saying something very similar. Can you just talk about the risk-benefit side and how you think about that and manage that?
Sure. I mean, for me, we are I'll be moving to the Bahamas, right? If we have a breach, so it's not a small thing, and data management when it comes to patient privacy is a make or break company event. So you're absolutely right, and of course, again, we have first-in-class software built to protect our patients and their privacy, and store everything very carefully. It seems if you open the paper, there's a breach every day. And so it's one of the things that certainly keeps me up at night. There's no way around it. And on that same note, we follow the same process as every other healthcare company would and should be expected to. And hopefully we'll keep everyone safe.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky subject, right? Because I use the 80-20 rule. I mean, if you're in the manufacturing business and it's no longer the case that a single company has all of the capabilities and technical expertise to kind of embrace these new technologies and go fast, right? You have to depend on partnerships, to your earlier question. And if you have to depend on partnerships, then sharing data and information becomes critical, right? So what do? I mean, you have to keep a tab on what is true IP for you, and you cannot share that, right? But to the large extent, if you can share information between yourselves and the partners to sort of take that couple of steps forward more rapidly, then you have a case for it, right? So I think sharing data through the right means, and this is where things like cybersecurity and the building a trust between businesses, building a trust between partners, those are all critical factors, right? But if you look at successes out there today, right, you will find that successes have come out of the fact that they've actually given up that fear that they're going to lose some of their IP just because they are sharing certain type of data, and back off of that and say, yes, I'm willing to share 80% of it, which I think I have more benefit in doing that than a risk, right? So you have to draw that balance. And depending on the industry, like in your case, of course, there's no question, right? But in some other industries, it may be that you are actually able to gain a lot more by sharing than not sharing.
I think I already made my comments before. I think it's very important to make sure your legal department is included in what data you're sharing and what you're not, and any gray areas are covered, and you being very transparent with your customers, right? Which for us is the retail owners, or for example, even Walmart, right, or other food big giants. So it's important to be transparent and connect with their technology department to have those security components, the compliance, and all that vetted through before you go into the journey.
So Susan, last question to you.
With respect to organizational structures, I'm just interested how those may have shifted given the challenges that we face today. So Bhupesh, I heard about your center of excellence, which is great. So you're, I'll say, rotating potentially your 20 leaders through that. Other changes from
Yeah, I think it's we're in the beginning, right? We are 18 months into that model. The Digital Innovation Center is new, so there's new talent, and a couple of them are here, actually. And we build that more to showcase to the company and corral all those fragmented digital innovations that is going on. One place to go, and the way we are doing the operating model is changing. Is we have a digital steering committee across all our business divisions, right? So that is nominated by our CEO and his direct reports, and they essentially are our eyes and ears on the ground to bring that digital pipeline back to this Digital Innovation Center. So IT, it's not IT just being in a silo. We are very much driven by the business needs and the business problems to do what we want. We're not, doing anything unless there's a business problem and a value to it, firstly. So that's one. That's how it's changed. And and beyond that small team, we have an extended, because we are supported by the executive management. We have an extended team. So when we do a project, it's a much larger team. We pull in other people from IT, so it becomes almost like a project team. And that's how we are evolved for now. Now, as we think further on, where the framework is falling is in domains, right? So we're seeing focus areas where it brings value, right? And that means we got to create digital teams around Factory 4.0, right? We're a manufacturing company, so why not have a focus on Factory 4.0? Have digital teams around customer experience, digital products and solutions, and digital workplace. So we're now shifting from let's showcase our innovations, let's get some products out there, to form very focused domain type of leaders, both business functional leaders as well as combining our team with that. And that's how we are, I think the model is going to change, if we come up with a lot of good results in those domains. So it's evolving. What we have is the first version of that digital model.
A couple more points to that. So what I have found in my experience is that despite organizational structures, you can make things happen. And here's how you do it, right? So you brought up an excellent point that if you have the right people at the table, right from step one, that you're about to take this journey on, right, then you're in good shape, right? And one anecdote I'll quote is that in my former company, one of the most successful projects was, it happened because the champion who actually took it through was a person who owned the manufacturing process. He or she was not from IT, he was not from engineering, not from product quality, nothing, right? He owned the process, and he became the champion. And he brought the right people on the table from step one. And that's a success story, right? So things can happen despite organization structure, particularly in industries and companies that are 100 plus years old. So
We have unfortunately run out of time. The cut signal has happened. Just to close, one of the things I did want to thank and express my thanks to the panel. There's so much discussion about digital disruption and all kinds of things. What you're hearing from my perspective is on the ground, what really needs to happen or what can happen and where these things are. There's a couple of themes that I think came through pretty clearly. One, just kind of going reverse order. It has to be the right people. That's been said a couple of times, or it just doesn't happen. The other thing, which I was picking up on in a strong way, is all three of you have looked at the opportunity and have defined at least some line of sight opportunity to get you started. And it's, Bhupesh, you kept using, I'm dabbling in it, I'm trying, or I'm starting small. Renee, you all started big, right? And then working some of these things through.
Not really, but okay.
All right. Well, you start with a whole new model, is what I'm saying. And I know in the manufacturing space, it kind of runs the gamut. But that business of actually having a model and having a line of sight and taking that forward actually becomes very clear. It's only then that you can actually tackle some of these risks and benefits. And the last thing I'll close with is this whole opportunity around data. I was kind of fascinated. There were some new opportunities presented about data because of the way it's collected, because of the models that allow things to be done that have not been done or are not being done today. That's actually pretty important. How to identify those going forward, and then you get into the question of how to monetize that or show value in other ways. So some really interesting themes, and I thank you again. And thanks.